But let's talk about the vote and who might have voted against the government tonight, because, of course, there were a series of, in fact, there were something, what were there, 12 cabinet ministers and secretaries who voted against the government last night or abstained against the government. With me is Sebastian Payne, the Whitehall correspondent for the Financial Times, and Maddy Thimont Jack from the Institute for Government. Welcome to you both. I should get that right. There were 12, weren't there? And then there was one who voted against it. What happened tonight?
It was quite extraordinary that you had all these ministers who were coming out and saying the government's policy is to have a short Brexit extension to the end of June. That's notionally to pass Theresa May's deal. Now, that deal is not making any more signs of getting it into law there, but that is what the government's policy is. But we don't really have a functioning government at the moment, so it was a free vote. And, you know, the extraordinary side of ministers like Steve Barclay, the Brexit secretary, the man who's negotiating Brexit, voting against the government's own Brexit policy. You have Gavin Williamson, a leadership contender, Andrea Leadsom, all these people voting against the government. But the motion still went through, so Theresa May is probably going to come back with her deal probably next Monday or Tuesday. If it doesn't pass, then it looks like Brexit is very much not going to happen on March the 29th.
What I thought was interesting about the way the day unfolded today, Maddy, was the role that the Speaker played and the amendments that he selected. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so it was quite interesting because the sort of start of the debate was there was quite a furore about the amendments he selected. The ERG were very unhappy that he hadn't selected one of their amendments, which would have allowed them to try and rule out a second referendum. Now, he said that, you know, given he'd selected an amendment in favour of a second referendum, they could then vote against it and sort of express their opposition in that way. What we did see tonight is Labour front bench decide to abstain on that vote when it was put to a vote. What I thought was most interesting on that vote particularly was that actually 334 MPs opposed the second referendum, including 18 Labour MPs. So I think if I was Theresa May, I'd be looking at that group of Labour MPs and thinking they might be the group that will get her deal over the line, whether that's next week, the week after, or sort of later down the line.
Yeah, we've just been talking with Martin Howe, the lawyer who's advising the ERG, the European Research Group. He doesn't like the extra legal advice that he's seeing from the Attorney General. How many of the ERGers do you think are definitely not going to vote for this deal, Sebastian?
So the ERG, which is the main Brexit caucus, if you like, in the House of Commons, is quite misunderstood. People think it's this grand unified body. In fact, it's really a party within a party. It has its own leader, its own deputy leader, its own lawyers, its own spokesman, and its own policy unit. And much like normal political parties, it is split. So you've got about 20 or so hardcore ERGers who have consistently voted against everything towards a softer or compromised Brexit. They're never going to get on board. Then there are probably about 10 or so ERGers who are mulling over, if Theresa May went, maybe I could endorse her deal. And you've got the rest of the group, sort of 60 or so, who are sort of mulling it over. And some ERGers I've spoken to today have said, I'm actively looking for reasons to vote for this. And it's interesting you mentioned Martin Howe, because the Star Chamber of ERG lawyers is meeting this weekend to look at this proposal of the Vienna Convention on International Treaties very much into the weeds.
Well, he's just given it a very big thumbs down. He said
exactly.
It doesn't fly for him.
And this is Geoffrey Cox's latest cunning plan to try and get the DUP back on board, because ultimately the ERG comes second, the DUP come first. Those are the people Theresa May needs to get on side to pass her deal.
So I suppose, coming back to your point, the question is how many of those Labour MPs think there is enough in this deal and don't like the idea of a longer extension?
Well, I think that's sort of what Theresa May is sort of hoping, is that the prospect of voting down the deal next week and her going to the European Council and asking for that longer extension will persuade enough of her backbenchers to get behind the deal, and potentially that sort of group of Labour MPs, as Sebastian has just said, still doesn't necessarily look likely it's going to be the case next week. And I think that's the problem for her with Labour, is that Labour MPs are not going to vote with the government if there's any chance that they won't get the deal over the line, because they don't want to throw that away. And what I would say as well is, if the vote is tight, if she eventually manages to get that majority, the sort of what she's hoping for, it's not the end of the process, because we still need the withdrawal agreement bill, sort of a very contentious piece of legislation where there could be many divisions, many votes like we've seen tonight, and she's got to try and keep a majority on side throughout that process. So it's definitely not easy, even if MPs support the Prime Minister's deal.
Meanwhile, Theresa May's future, is it tied to the third vote next week? We've heard from people like George Freeman today, who used to be a Theresa May loyalist, who's now saying no, she has to go. Does she have to go after the third vote next week? Is that it? Particularly given what is happening within the cabinet.
Well, my sense within the cabinet is that everybody thinks she is finished as Prime Minister. Nobody's expecting her to go on a long time, because there was this feeling that if she got her deal through, then she would get this bounce. She's managed to, finally do the thing everybody said she couldn't do. But she's been so wounded by the votes this week. Nobody I've spoken to thinks that that is really the case. But the Conservative Party can't get rid of her, because they try to have this vote.
That's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? Because the Conservative Party, by tradition, is ruthless when it comes to leadership, and yet they're sticking by her. And is there anything in the reporting that we've seen that maybe her resignation would be tied to, look, I'll take the withdrawal agreement across, I'll give you my resignation if you back the deal?
Well, so far what we do know she's actually said is that she won't run in the next general election. Obviously, we don't know when that election will come, and I think there are sort of weapons that are at some MPs' sort of fingertips. They could threaten to vote against her in a vote of confidence, sort of a vote of confidence in the government, if the Labour opposition were to bring that forward. But I think at the moment, it seems like at this stage, I'm not sure that many people want to come forward and take up this baton, because actually it's clearly been a very challenging process for the Prime Minister. She's in a really difficult position, and the EU is saying they are not willing to talk any further on the backstop. So there is a bit of a question mark about do sort of leaders in waiting want to come through at this stage, or would they rather wait until after the UK's left the EU and sort of take the future relationship?
Just to quickly on that vote of confidence, John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, said this week that they're reserving that, and it might be soon that they would bring that vote of no confidence forward again.
And I still think the government would ultimately win that, because there's a very small part of the ERG that would like to bring down the government, but I think generally the sense is that's not going to happen. So I think, Theresa May is relatively safe for the moment, but I think what could really do for her is if the cabinet comes to her and says, look, thank you so much, you've done this amazing job, but you need to make way for someone else. This is your so-called men and women in grey suits, the party grandees, who just say you can't go on. But I wouldn't read too much into a confidence vote, because the one thing that still totally unites the Conservative Party is a loathing of Jeremy Corbyn. So whatever happens, they will do their utmost to keep him out of office. So yes, we will probably get another confidence vote, but as long as the DUP are on side, and I think the Conservatives will be safe in power.
Interesting. Sebastian, Maddy, thank you very much indeed.